Hello everyone, welcome back to Evoverse. This time Evoverse will recap the movie from 2003 titled Wrong Turn. This movie tells the story of several people trapped by strange creatures that thirst for blood. How is the next story? Let's review the storyline of this movie. We remind you all what we are going to say, this is a spoiler. For those of you who don't have a problem with spoilers, let's continue the story and enjoy. At the beginning of the movie, we are shown a couple who are doing rock climbing activities. With a place set in a forest and very far from the city. Initially, they did not experience any obstacles and everything went smoothly as usual. But not, after the girl slipped and had to be detached from the foothold stone. The guy who had arrived at the top then tried to help this girl to climb again, but for some reason, the guy did not make a sound and did not pull the rope. The girl who was waiting to be helped was surprised after a drop of blood fell on her face. She knew this was not a good thing. Not long after, the guy was thrown off the cliff and the girl was pulled strongly upwards as if someone was pulling the rope, but she tried to escape by cutting the rope and she fell right next to her dead lover in a terrible condition. Then the girl went into the forest and tried to escape. While running, she tripped over a wire that had been installed by whoever and the movie began. In the next scene, we are shown a man named Chris facing a long traffic jam. Because he was impatient and in a hurry, Chris immediately got out of his car and walked forward to find out what happened. After asking someone, it turns out that there was a big oil truck that rolled over and took hours to escape this traffic jam. In a hurry because he had to go to a meeting, Chris immediately turned his vehicle around and looked for the nearest gas station in hopes of finding a pay phone and giving the news that he was stuck in traffic. When he arrived at a gas station, Chris talked to an old man who guarded the place and tried to use the only pay phone available. But unfortunately, the phone was broken. A confused Chris looked at a map and searched for a shortcut that could get him out of the jam. He found a shortcut outlined in red and immediately left the gas station. Long story short, Chris arrived at a road called Bear Mountain Road. The trip went smoothly and calmly without any obstacles, but when in the middle of the trip, the music tape he heard stopped because the cassette was stuck. Chris tried to pick up the music cassette that fell and in the end, he lost control and did not realize there was a car parked in the middle of the road and Chris crashed into it. Not long after, there came 5 people who explained that it was their car. They stopped in the middle of the road because their car tires were leaking due to running over barbed wire that no one knew who had installed. These 5 people consisted of a guy with glasses named Evan, Evan's girlfriend named Francine, then a guy in a yellow shirt named Scott, with his girlfriend named Carly, and a girl named Jessie. Finally, they got to know each other and discussed asking for help around this area. Chris, Scott, Carly, and Jessie also planned to walk along Bear Mountain Road to find help, while Evan and Francine would stand guard in the car alone. Meanwhile, Evan hears voices in the woods and enters the forest without his girlfriend's knowledge. Francine was confused when Evan was spoken to with no reply at all, then she walked and tried to find Evan. However, she only found Evan's shoes and she was surprised to find a piece of a human ear lying on the ground. Then Francine was shocked and confused about what to do. Suddenly, from behind her, there was someone who immediately held Francine with a spiked chain until Francine's jaw was cut, and died instantly. Not long after, Chris, Scott, Carly, and Jessie who were traveling found a small house that seemed to be inhabited by residents around the area. With high hopes, the 4 of them tried to enter and hoped to get help from the residents of the house. But when they entered, it turned out that the house was in an empty condition, dirty and messy. It was very noticeable that the house was not very well maintained. It looked like someone was living in the house, with meat being cooked, and then there was a dinner plate that still had meat on it. Then they tried to find a telephone that they could use to call for help. While searching, they were confused because all they found were strange objects that were stored randomly, and there were also many sharp weapons hanging on the walls of the house. Carly, who felt the urge to pee, tried to find the bathroom in the house. And she was surprised because in the bathroom there were lots of human teeth and human jaws stored in glass jars. Chris opened the refrigerator in the house. He was surprised to find many jars of human flesh being stored. Jessie also found the same barbed wire that made their car tires punctured. And this barbed wire is the same as what we saw at the beginning of the film, which made the girl rock climber stumble. The 4 of them realized that they would not find help in this house and that this house was not a safe place. They immediately tried to get out of the house, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The psychopaths came home and realized that someone had entered their house. Chris and Jessie hide under the bed, while Scott and Carly hide in the shed. Immediately Chris and Jesse were shocked when they saw Francine's bloodied corpse being dragged by the three psychopaths. With feelings of fear and anxiety, they had to watch Francine's corpse being brutally cut up, starting with cutting Francine's hand using a saw. Not long after, the three psychopaths fell asleep. Chris and Jesse tried to get out from under the bed. Scott and Carly tried to get out of the barn. The four of them tried to get out of the house secretly. To prevent the door from making a sound when they got out, Chris used his hand to hold the door until it bled so that the door would not make a sound. Then they managed to get out, and soon one of the psychopaths woke up. Chris immediately ran after his three friends into the forest. The three psychopaths immediately chased them by car. The four of them ran into the forest, and out of nowhere they arrived at a place where damaged cars were gathered. And it turned out to be the cars of other victims who had been killed by the three psychopaths. Then, the three psychopaths realized that they were there. Chris tried to attract their attention so that Scott, Jesse, and Carly could take the car used by the psychopaths. Unfortunately, Chris's leg had to be shot, and Scott tried to attract the psychopaths' attention by running into the forest. Jesse and Carly help Chris to walk to the car, and they drive away in the psychopath's car. Scott, who was still running in the forest, tried to catch up with Chris, Jesse, and Carly. When he arrived at the side of the road, unfortunately, Scott had to die because he was shot 3 times by an arrow right in his chest. In the next scene, we are shown Chris, Carly, and Jesse who find a tall tower in the middle of the forest. They think there will be a radio that can be used to call for help. They climb to the top of the tower, and sure enough, they found an old radio that was still working. They tried to communicate, but no answer came out from the radio. On the other hand, Chris also realized that the psychopaths were passing by the tower and did not realize that Chris, Carly, and Jesse were in the tower. Unlucky things happened. The radio that had no sound, but suddenly the radio sounded loud. The psychopaths realized and tried to climb into the tower but could not because the entrance was held by Chris. The psychopaths immediately set fire to the tower using the torches they carried. Chris, Carly, and Jesse were confused. They had to be forced to jump into the trees secretly because they didn't want to burn to death. At first, one by one of them jumped and everything went smoothly, but unfortunately, Carly had to die horribly with her head cut off from her body. It turns out there is one psychopath climbing trees and realizing they are in the tree. Then the rest are only Chris and Jesse who managed to escape. Long story short, Chris and Jesse found a waterfall and they rested there until morning. When morning came, they tried to continue their journey again, and they saw a highway that they could follow to go to the city. But suddenly, the psychopaths attacked them. Chris fought back and tried to protect themselves from the attacks of the psychopaths, but Jesse had to be caught and separated from Chris. Chris, who fell and rolled down, saw a police car crossing the road in front of him. Chris spoke that he was in desperate need of help, and he was grateful that his radio call for help was heard. The policeman who helped him did not survive long. The policeman was hit in the head and killed instantly. Chris, who tried to escape using the police car, instead had to be confused again, because it turned out that the car keys fell next to the corpse of the policeman. The psychopath who managed to kill the policeman immediately went downstairs to examine the corpse of the policeman. Chris, who was in a state of urgency, had to quietly hide under the car. Chris, who realized that the psychopath would check under the car, immediately fled to the surrounding bushes, and the psychopath drove away in the police car. The psychopath immediately dragged the police corpse into the car to make it the meat stock in their refrigerator. Chris immediately chased the car and dangled under the car without realizing it. The next scene shows Jesse, who has been kept in the psychopath's house and is ready to be brutally mutilated. Jesse, who has been begging, will still be mutilated because psychopaths are different from normal humans. Here Jesse is lucky because when she is about to be mutilated, a police car driven by another psychopath arrives. By carrying a police corpse that looks fresher, the psychopaths cut the police corpse first, starting by cutting the police officer's head off his body. Jesse's turn to be mutilated arrived. The psychopath was ready with his machete, but suddenly, the door of the psychopath's house caught fire, so they were confused. When they were caught off guard, a police car driven by Chris came and crashed into their house and hit one of the psychopaths. Chris fights with the two psychopaths while trying to save Jesse. While untying Jesse's hands, suddenly a psychopath wakes up and pulls Chris and tries to attack Chris using an axe. They fought once again, and Chris, who was overwhelmed, had to surrender to being strangled by the psychopath. A little longer Chris would die from suffocation, but fortunately, there was Jesse who managed to shoot the psychopath's head. Not only that, there was still one psychopath who appeared suddenly and hit Chris many times. Jesse also tried to help Chris by inviting the psychopath to fight. And finally, their collaboration was successful. The psychopath had to be choked by a chain around his neck by Chris, and Jesse immediately attacked the psychopath's chest using an axe. Chris immediately picked up the shotgun that had fallen and they jumped out of the house. Chris only had one bullet left. Without thinking, Chris immediately shot the gas tank in the car and the explosion destroyed the house. Chris and Jesse, who managed to escape and kill the three psychopaths, returned to the gas station that we saw at the beginning of the movie. With a severe injury and limp, Chris immediately tore the map on the wall of the gas station and took it away, and the movie ended. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and see you on the next movie recap.